let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
This is so awesome.
We are an open culture that believes in importance of
What is that process that a developer, or let's say,
as the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed?
Welcome to In the Clouds. I'm your host, Stu Miniman, and last week I was with about 7,000 people in the community at KubeCon and Cloud Native Con in Detroit. It was my first time going to Detroit, but I've been at the KubeCon shows for lots and lots of years. So much to unpack there, as well as we're going to talk about a topic that's been really interesting. I've been following, a bit for the last year, but who my guest has spent much more time on. So happy to welcome the program. He is a fellow Red Hat live streamer in the past. Actually left Red Hat for a little bit, but thankfully came back to the mothership and is working with us again. So happy to welcome the program, Christian Hernandez. His boring title is Senior Principal Product Manager, but he is the GitOps Kingpin. Any questions that I had about GitOps, I usually go to Christian. He was the original host of the GitOps Guide to the Galaxy. I got to meet him first time in person last year at LA, and a few things changed since then. So, hey, Christian, welcome here. Welcome back. Good to see you. It was fun to hang out with you last week in Detroit.
Yeah, no, and it was good to see everyone in 3D, as as they say, right? It's kind of, we were, a lot of us were pre-pandemic times where like we saw each other regularly, and then then the pandemic happened, and I met new people virtually, so it was kind of cool to see them, as in 3D, right? Not behind a screen. And it was good to, like you said, see 7,000 of my closest friends out there at KubeCon. It was a lot of fun, and thank you for having me on.
Yeah, so Christian, it's interesting. You and I had about a year and a half ago, my group merged into the group that you were a part of, so got to meet you a little bit. Then, KubeCon was in your backyard of LA, so got to meet you in person for a full time. KubeCon LA was really good to see a few people and some coworkers, but overall, it was still, challenging times in the pandemic. There weren't a lot of customers there. There was that mix of virtual and in-person. It really felt like things were way back much more this year. But, before we get into some of the techs and the show itself, Christian, I know KubeCon last week, you were answering a lot of questions because since I saw you a year ago, you left Red Hat. You went to a startup for a bit and you ended up coming back. So if you could just, what can you share with our audience about that experience?
Yeah. So it was, one of those things where, it wasn't, saw an opportunity, worked at it for a while, wasn't the exact fit that I thought it was going to be. Red Hat has always been my home. It's always, some people say, that I heard to say, like a lot of Red Hatters say that I joined Red Hat before I officially joined Red Hat. I was a a Red Hat customer for a very, very long time, a big fan of Red Hat, and then I had the opportunity to join Red Hat, and it really it's always felt like home to me. Got a great opportunity to be in the cloud services business unit, right, building out new and exciting services based on Red Hat technologies. And it felt like a natural fit. I always told people that I was an SA before at Red Hat. I was actually I love telling the story. I was the second OpenShift SA in North America. So if you can believe that, there was only two of us in the in the United States and Canada that knew about OpenShift. So as you can tell, I flew a lot. I did a lot of travel back then. And then I came to, the hybrid platforms business unit that, originally it was called the OpenShift business unit, but now the hybrid platforms business unit, as that BU has grown a lot. As a technical marketing, I always felt that I knew what should be built. And now I have the opportunity to actually build some of those things, kind of put my money where my mouth is, sort of thing. I've experienced a lot. I've seen a lot. I feel that, quite honestly, just I feel like Red Hat has a lot with respect to what they can deliver as a managed services. So now I'm in the cloud services BU, trying to build some of the cool things that I used to sell as an SA, right? To use some of those cool solutions to build managed services. So it's great to be back. It's great to I think I can sum it up as like putting on a pair of my favorite shoes, coming back to it. So.
Oh, awesome. Look, the team super excited to, have you back. I got to see you. We broke bread with, some of our team members that you'd worked with for many years.
Mm-hmm.
And the word you've used, I've heard many times from Red Hatters is home. It's a special culture. I wasn't a Red Hat customer, but I was a partner of Red Hat for many years. When I was, an analyst and doing media stuff, Red Hat was a client of mine, but, we had a great partnership relationship. So, absolutely a special culture. One of the, main drivers that brought me to the company was the culture, the people. And yeah, you got a good challenge in front of you. Cloud services, you're on in the clouds here.
Yeah.
This is where it
Yes.
at. Hey, Christian, I think this cloud thing, it might be real, right?
It might be, yeah. I think now I think it's starting to grow some legs, right? This whole cloud thing. It took us a while maybe to get here, but I think it might be a thing now, as you said. I think. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. So, look, and, you, as I mentioned, GitOps is something that you've had, a good, industry leadership experience. You were speaking at the GitOps con there. Want to talk more about GitOps and, some of the broader things that happened at the show last week, but also want to get your, what was the general feel that you had? I saw, security was obviously, still a major theme. The Cloud Native Con and some of the other pieces that were at the day zero events had a strong security focus. We'll get into, there's a security aspect of, your world in GitOps. And there were a couple other technologies like WASM had some really good buzz this year. There's always one or two new things that I'm like, oh, hey, great. I got to learn about something else because
yes.
Somebody's going to ask about it and how do we deal with it? Where are we plugged into it, or just something we want to geek out? So any kind of, macro thoughts from yourself?
Yeah. Well, I do think that I do agree with you that it is. Anytime I go to like KubeCon or any sort of like event like this that is that big, is like I always think, man, now I have like a handful of things to research now that when I get back home, like there's always something new. It's like, wow, I never seen that before. That's actually really cool. I need to look up on that. It's a very I think for all the co-located event, right? The day zero, the day -1. I don't know what we're calling them now. I guess just co-located event. For now, I think there's the ecosystem built around Kubernetes and just the whole cloud native has grown just massively. You can't really keep track of all the things that are. I think now the industry is now starting to catch up and starting to put new solutions out there that people need internally, right? There's you brought up the aspect of security, like the security, when Kubernetes first came out, right, from internally from Google, I think it struggled with a lot of the things that people just open source for the first time. Is like, we built this very specific thing for our very specific use case, and when you open source that, then you expose it to all these other use cases where people go, oh man, I never thought of that. Or, the people who originally created the software always think, wow, I never thought about that use case. And so then you're starting to see that a lot with the cloud native space, where it's like all these different solutions are popping up only just out of necessity. People internally is like, well, Kubernetes is cool, but what about this aspect? What about that aspect? And I do think that things like security is still evolving and still growing rapidly within within the industry, within just like the cloud native space. That's just, there's just one thing after another. It's like, whoa, what about this? What about this? What about this? So I see security being still playing a big role.
Yeah. I mean, last year in LA, I think the discussion we had is GitOps and like SigStore were like the two things that we heard a ton about. I'm representing, the SIG Store hoodie
Yes.
here. Of course, Luke Hines from Red Hat, instrumental in that project, getting started, and a lot of talks on it. Even, I'll give a quick plug, Red Hatters or external people watching it. I've actually got a position open for a technical marketing position to focus on security. So somebody that can do demos, the type of stuff, Christian's been doing. It's the same, what we call the TMM, the technical marketing manager role, in the security space, working with my team. So if you know people, we'll post in the chat, the job link, or just go to jobs.redhat.com. And you should be able to find it. It's always good. Yeah. So we've got that in the chat. And yeah, Christian, your fan club's here. I see in one of the chat here. They love listening to you, the content and the explainers. We already posted in the chat. Let's get right into it. GitOpsCon. What security, was this your lightning talk, or was this,
So there was actually a few talks that I really liked about that happened at GitOpsCon, right? So for those that don't know, GitOpsCon is a co-located event with KubeCon. We've done it. We actually did it virtually first, and then we actually did it in person in LA, which like Stu, that you mentioned that LA kind of felt like a vendor fest, but we did get 50 people to show up, which was actually pretty large for what it was, right? For what our first coming back. And we actually did it again in KubeCon EU in Valencia, where we got 250 people, and this time around we got about 200 people. So it's definitely growing. We actually had 2 tracks. We had so many talks a minute. We had 2 tracks. So GitOpsCon is ran by the GitOps working group, right? Which is the governing body, I would imagine, or the governing working group that governs Open GitOps. So for those that are interested, go to opengitops.dev. It's essentially Open GitOps is a vendor neutral way of, I guess, principle-led GitOps kind of principles, right? So it's principles-led for GitOps. So like, what does it mean to be GitOps or GitOps compliant is kind of what the working group, among other things, right? The working group also works on like white papers, best practices, things like that. And so if you go to opengitops.dev, you find out more information about that. Members from Red Hat, Weaveworks, CodeFresh, Amazon, Microsoft's in there, GitHub's in there. So there was a lot. It's essentially vendor neutral. Okay, like let's kind of define what GitOps is, and we figured let's do an event, right? And that's what GitOpsCon was, right? GitOpsCon is like an event talking.
All right.
About
GitOps. So Christian, you're used to doing the, hey, here's the hands-on demo. Let me do the labs and everything like that. For this audience, step back for us for a second. So you threw out a bunch of companies' names from an open source project standpoint. There's Argo, there's Flux. But if I'm talking to a business person, what's this GitOps thing? Why do I care? What does it do for me?
Yeah. So GitOps in general is a practice that DevOps practitioners use in order to quickly manage the ever-growing infrastructure, right? So infrastructure, especially with Kubernetes and cloud-native architecture, is exponentially growing, and there needs to be a way to manage that centrally. And that's kind of like what GitOps, the idea behind GitOps is. It was born out of like the DevOps methodology. I always say DevOps is the culture, and GitOps is how that culture looks like in practice. And it's really like a set of like principles and practices that an end user can use in order to manage their infrastructure at scale. And it has important things like delivering application, having a central source of truth, right? So that way you have like that audit ability. Is like, who made this change, who approved this change, and kind of you have that audit trail of how has your infrastructure has evolved throughout this entire process. And then also the drift detection as well, right? So it's one thing to deploy your application, deploy your workloads to a cluster, but then what happens when that drifts, right? What happens when a service goes down and it needs to be brought back up? You can do that automatically, and that's kind of like the paradigm of GitOps, that what GitOps gives you, that manageability across massive scale.
Yeah, it's funny. The reason I said this is one of those services, when I explain some of the value of OpenShift, it's like, well, hey, here's a way you might want to be thinking about the way you develop your code. Everybody knows what GitHub is. Lots of projects live on GitHub. What if I could have my configuration status just live in GitHub? And as you said, it's kind of, we've been talking forever about things like infrastructure as code. I want to make sure here's my central source of truth. And it makes sure that we don't have things like drift, because so automation and security all play into it. But it's a nice simple example of saying, and here's open source projects, and we have this part of what we do with OpenShift. And one of the things I loved is when the code reached the 1.0 status, we already had a few customers that were using it in production, got huge value of it. Everything from government agencies to financial services, companies that really care about things like, having structure around what they're doing and making sure that, again, the value of automation and security, tie into what's happening there.
Yeah. And actually, like, someone actually just put in the chat about like DevOps, DevSecOps, MIOps, MILOps. Does it not govern all of those as well? Well, like GitOps is it's not, it doesn't like take over any of these, splat ops, right? Like DevOps or DevSecOps or MI, like it doesn't like take over it. It's like a cornerstone of those practices, right? Like DevSecOps, right, will use GitOps in order for to put their security policies in place and making sure, there's like if you're using something like Kyverno, I always mispronounce that, right? And you set up a policy, that's fine. But how do you prevent from someone to changing that policy, right? Just because you set a policy doesn't mean the policy can't be changed. The policy could be changed, but something like GitOps prevents that change, right? Because you have a source of truth, and it's like, no, that policy needs to be this, not that, and it'll switch that back up. So GitOps doesn't really like take over or replace any of these other practices. It takes part in these practices. It's part of the it's a smaller piece of a bigger whole picture of culture, right? Like if you think about DevOps, DevSecOps, all of that is really more culture than actual practice. So. Yeah,
well, that's right. If we look at what DevOps is, in many ways, it's not so much about the tooling; it's about how we do things. But GitOps being part of that overall practice, it's an enforcement mechanism. So again, so many companies, I think about banks, Christian, I'm old enough to be like, okay, the bank, created a gold CD or a gold server configuration, and everybody had to use that. Well, in today's cloud microservices architecture, GitOps kind of does that for us. It's what we used to do in like a physical environment, and now it's doing it from a software standpoint. Is my choice.
Yeah, well, and I always joke that like GitOps is really like things that I've always wanted to do, right? Things that we've always wanted to do or kind of tried to do with like various scripts and things like that, but now has like it's part of a central governing. I think with cloud native architecture and like Kubernetes and that whole ecosystem really made things like GitOps possible, right? Like the whole immutability of containers and cloud native infrastructure and the whole self-heal remediation, that sort of thing made GitOps actually possible for things that we've been trying to do for like a long time, right? Like you said, like the golden CD, but like we would do like corporate standard builds, right? Like, like this is the OS and all these components, and this is the only thing you're allowed to run. And we had scripts, we had like things like Puppet and Chef. I was a big Chef guy, trying to, deploy all these things and making sure they're all in sync. But now, like with cloud native architecture, like that becomes a lot easier. That becomes like doable. Like, oh, this is the stuff I've been wanting to do this whole time, but now I can do it. I kind of feel like the old man yells at cloud. I'm like, you kids have it so easy nowadays. Like back, back when I was doing all of this, it was a bunch of corn scripts that I ran through SSH tunnels. It's just, It's a lot easier now.
It's always easy to be like, boy, God, that project that I spent months on, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, if only I had half the tooling that they have available today. It's crazy to think about that. So at the show itself, give us, what were you talking about? Any key feedback you had from the user community out there? Are you still educating a lot of people on like GitOps 101, or where are we with the overall adoption and diffusion of that technology?
So so I think now that people are adopting tools like Argo CD and Flux and using these kind of tools in their CI/CD pipelines, I find that we're talking less about GitOps 101. I think as a GitOps working group, we've done well with spreading the word. And the reason I think that we've done well is that I heard Chris Wright like actually spit out the principles. I'm like, oh, if our GitOps principles makes it to the lips of the Red Hat CTO, I think we've done, at least a pretty good job of getting that message out there. So I think some of the things I've seen with GitOps now, like some of the talks I saw was like the GitOps Con about people talking about security, right? Like how does security fit all in place with GitOps, and what some of the use cases people solved with security, things like Kyverno, things with OPA, people doing things with OPA, and security for their own specific use cases. I thought that was really cool. I think I've seen a lot of security talks pop up. I've seen also what's really cool. What I find really cool is that, and I wish I had more time for, but we all only have time for what we have for, is sustainability. How GitOps fits in with sustainability. There was a great talk about using GitOps not only to like doing remediation, but to also place workloads based on like CO2 emissions, right? Which I thought that was really, really cool. It's like it's less about like moving workloads into like, oh, there's some free space on this server, I'm going to move that workload there. It's like, well, no, it may be more advantageous from a sustainability standpoint to put it on this server, even though it's maybe the utilizations may be high for what something like that. Having sustainability, that's starting to like be part of more of the GitOps conversation, which I thought was really, really cool. And also one thing I saw was really that we really haven't solved the secrets problem yet, right? So like the issue with GitOps is that you're placing everything in Git as a source of truth, but as a security person, or most people, I'm like, well, I don't want to store my secrets there, necessarily, because like that's the username and password for our database. Why would I want that in Git? And so that problem, I mean, there's tools out there, right? There's tools like Vault, there's tools like Seal Secrets, but I don't think that has been solved yet in any sort of way that people say, yeah, this is the one true way of doing it. Everyone does it a different way. And maybe that's the answer, doing it a different way. But I've seen that from what I can tell, that problem hasn't been solved yet. So for those of you who have done really cool things with secrets and GitOps, we're going to have another GitOps Con. So when that CFP happens, please, if you solved interesting problems, please submit that CFP. But I think that's another thing that I saw at GitOps Con. It's like, we haven't really solved this problem yet with secrets.
Yeah, well, right. It's good to understand, where we are with the overall maturity there, and there's still challenges. And unfortunately, I'm waiting for the day that we just say, "Hey, security, we're all set." But
yes.
It's one of the things why I mentioned at the top of the show. Yeah, I'm higher in the space. We've got lots of opportunities.
Yes. Yeah.
Security, pervasive, challenge that we all as an ecosystem need to work on. So maybe we switch into kind of a broader discussion of KubeCon, because, Christian, I love, I'd been at the show for a number of years before I joined Red Hat, but, the recommendation from the Red Hat team is like, it's project first. Of course, everything we do is open source. It goes upstream, but I didn't pack any, Red Hat branded gear when I went there. You went to the projects and you're collaborating with people across the industry. So, a couple booths over from us is, Suse and the Rancher team, and our team's talking with them. And we have people that have gone between those companies. VMware has great presence, in open source, and lots of people that we collaborate. I sat on a panel with VMware and Intel. The cloud providers themselves. It was funny. I remember in the early days, Christian, everybody's like, oh, well, Google's created Kubernetes so that they have a way to get people off of AWS. who's a big booths right in the front of the thing?
Yeah.
It's AWS. They're there. We're all working amongst each other. Cats and dogs living together, as we always say.
Yes.
But, you're in the community. How's the community itself? And as we talked at the beginning, it's very much. There's so much going on. I was listening to a podcast, a friend of ours, Brian Gracely, does the Cloudcast, and their roundup was, hey, the show, like Kubernetes is there, but there's so many other pieces that don't venture, because otherwise you can get lost as to like so many. You could never learn all about 147 projects or something going on in that ecosystem. So, yeah.
Yeah. From what I saw, and you hit the nail on the head there, right? Where there's a saying, right? In open source is like same team, different company, right? Because you're working in the community, and same. I've seen, I'm part of it. In case you don't see, I'm part of the Argo community there, as well as the Open GitOps community, and it's great, right? Like you go to the Argo booth, right? I spent time at the Argo booth there as well. And there's people from Acuity and Red Hat and CodeFresh and Intuit. Like we're just kind of we're part of the same project, right? Like you said, it's not unusual to talk to quote unquote a competitor, only because just the very nature of open source and the very nature of just like an event like KubeCon, where it's kind of like
Christian, do you have a battle royale with Alexis Richardson, who, if our audience doesn't
know, and I did not actually
in Flux and everything?
Actually, no, it wasn't. It was and I actually spent time with Alexis Richardson, right? I spent time with him, chatting with him, and there wasn't a fist fight, right, between what's better, Argo or Flux, right? It's we were in Detroit, and I actually explained it to someone. Since we're in Detroit, I'm like, it's like a muscle car, right? Like you're a fan of muscle cars. You're maybe a fan of Ford. You may be a fan of Chevy, but we both like muscle cars, right? And it's kind of like that same idea. Whereas like Alexis Richardson, he's a Flux guy. I'm a Argo guy, but we both are fans of GitOps, and we talked to you for lengths at about GitOps at KubeCon. So that's it's not unusual to talk
funny
to quote unquote competitors.
Because, you mentioned, we obviously give a number of the car manufacturers as partners of ours. I went out to dinner with, it was people from two different car companies, and they were talking about like, oh wait, the ones that work there. So in Detroit, they all go work at the different companies too. So it's just like the tech industry. We're all as there's a small number of us. Whatever badge you're in today, it could change. We change cars, we change jobs, but.
I believe we lost Stu. Okay, so it wasn't me. All right. Yeah, I don't mind being on by myself. There he is. Oh, no, Stu's back. Is he? He may or may not be back. But just to kind of go, oh, he is gone. Thank you, Sasha. But just kind of just like round out that point, there is a lot in open source. It kind of makes weird friendships happen, especially like for me and in my world of GitOps and Argo CD and Flux. Like I was over at the Flux booth as well, just talking to the folks that I knew about GitOps, and we're just kind of chatting away and talking and being in being a good open source citizen. Yeah, that's kind of like the Flux Argo, correct? Yeah. So someone actually asked, is there much difference between Argo and Flux? They put glue, but it's really Flux, and like it's really a Venn diagram. There's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of similarities only because it's the idea was behind GitOps, right? And so like there's only so many ways to solve that problem. Flux was born from internally at Weaveworks, because Weaveworks used to be they used to run managed services, and Flux was created with the SRE by the SRE folks, right? So the SRE folks created a tool to kind of just do their work, and Alexis Richardson's like, hey, this is pretty cool. We should probably open source this and build a community around it. In parallel, Intuit was trying to solve the same problems, but they solved it from a different aspect, right? So where Flux was born from the SRE kind of community, Argo was built to try to abstract Kubernetes away from the developer. They didn't want the developer to know anything about Kubernetes. They just kind of wanted to onboard developers quickly. So Argo CD has like a nice UI, has, you know, kind of like that ClickOps aspect of it, because it was built by Intuit to help their developers onboard quicker. So it's kind of like they're coming from two different paradigms and kind of meeting in the middle, kind of like there's a Venn diagram. So it's really the differences are very, very minute. They're very, very minute. Did we get Stu back?
Yeah, no,
Is Stu back?
I think I'm back, right? Can you hear me now?
Oh, right.
Yeah, no, thank you for jumping in there. Yeah, you know, network connectivity issues. So, yes, Christian, you know, give us your thoughts on Detroit overall, though. So, you know, it's my first time going there. Want to hear your thoughts before I chime in.
Yeah. No, it's Detroit. I'd never been to Detroit. The only thing that I knew about Detroit was you know, about the car manufacturing aspect of it. The downtown was really nice. It was really, really cool. My hotel was like down the street from the convention center, so like I had a nice view of the river walk every morning walking to the convention center. And Detroit was really, really nice with respect to having the conference there. I think it was you know, there's, you know, everyone always chooses like some of these bigger areas like New York or like LA or San Francisco, right? I think Detroit was a bold move from the CNCF, and I think it paid off. It was really, really nice. I had a good time meeting everyone there. We found as Red Hatters hard to find a place to eat only because it was so busy. Right, and so which I think is a good sign, right? Like that it was so busy that, like, you know, we were jumping from restaurant trying to find accommodation. So I think it was a good indication of how many people were there and were trying to, like, you know, explore the city. It was and I didn't realize how close Detroit was to Canada. So I'm kind of, you know, a little embarrassing fact for me. I'm like, because I've never actually thought to travel to Detroit. So like my first time there, I was like, oh, Canada's literally across the water.
Yeah, right next to the hotel was the tunnel that went underneath.
Yeah. Or like you make a wrong turn on the street and you're like on your way to Canada. You're like, oh. So it was I
heard, because
an interesting location.
Overall, I thought Detroit was interesting. It's a different choice. But I heard in the before times you could actually get accommodations in Canada, but right now still, you know, you don't want to have to go to a conference and go across the border every day. So that can be a little bit challenging. So
yes, for sure. Yeah, I think you're still choppy a little bit, Stu. Okay. People are saying.
Apologize for that. So yeah, Christian, what is your final takeaways on where you're at? You know, what you're seeing and what we can look from you in the future.
Yeah, for sure. So I am still in the like in the GitOps world, right? You'll always see me on the Argo CD, the open source there, the upstream in Argo and upstream in GitOps there. It's really I'm starting to see more GitOps becoming more of a kind of like an implementation detail, and I think that's where we want to be. With GitOps is kind of like, oh yeah, like that methodology has won with respect to cloud native. So I do want to see those practices evolve, right? I think it's very specific to cloud native right now. It'd be nice to be able to extend some of those practices to the bare metal world, the VMs. VMs aren't going anywhere anytime soon. With respect to other infrastructure devices out there, I do see a future in GitOps like going further to not just be cloud native specific. So I'll be around. I'll definitely be around in the, you know, I'm doing GitOps Guide to the Galaxy later on today. So I'm jumping back on that train as well. And yeah, look for some of these managed services coming out of Red Hat. There's some really cool stuff coming out, and a lot of it being GitOps backed. So proving that GitOps is it's here to stay. It's an actual thing, not just a buzzword. So that's kind of where I want to leave that there.
Awesome. Hey, Christian, thank you so much. My apologies that my audio network seemed to be a little bit flaky here at the end. We're going to be back in 2 weeks with Red Hat's new CIO. So I'm super excited for that. I promise I will be in a good place with better network and audio. So join us in 2 weeks. We'll be back at the normal time, which is 11 a.m. But do check GitOps Guide to the Galaxy. Go look at everything we've got. Let us know if you've got guests you'd like us to do. My last show of the year will be AWS reInvent. So looking forward to that. If you've got people that I should talk to ahead of the show, at the show, help wrap up the show. Always appreciate your feedback. And thank you as always for joining us on your journey in the clouds.
Awesome.